I never thought the person who would try to erase me from my own life would be the same woman who once held my hand on the floor of an empty building and said, "One day, this place will be ours." For 3 years, I believed we were building something together. Not just a restaurant, but a future. A name. A place people would remember. She brought the money, I brought everything else. The recipes, the suppliers, the hiring, the training, the hours, the panic, the sweat, the endless nights fixing things no customer would ever notice. When the walk-in cooler broke at 2 in the morning, I was there. When a dishwasher quit during Saturday service, I stepped in. When our first food critic came in unannounced, I was the one calmly plating 10 tables while pretending I wasn't terrified. But when people praised the place, she smiled like we had suffered equally. Like risk and labor were the same thing. I let myself believe that was enough. I told myself friendship mattered more than ego. I told myself loyalty would protect me. I was wrong. Before I tell you how she tried to take the restaurant from me, and how she ended up standing in front of the very people she thought she owned, publicly exposed and completely alone, subscribe to the channel and stay until the end. Because the moment the staff made their choice is still one of the most satisfying things I've ever seen. Her name was Vanessa, and when we met, neither of us looked like the kind of people who could open anything. We were 28, exhausted, underpaid, and constantly talking about how other people seemed to drift into real lives while we were still working double shifts for owners who didn't know our names. We met in a mediocre bistro where I was running the kitchen and she was doing consulting, which mostly meant hovering around the owner and saying obvious things with confidence. But she was charming. Very charming. She knew how to talk to landlords, bankers, customers, investors, and anyone with money. I knew food, operations, systems, staff morale, and what made people come back. We were opposites in a way that felt efficient. She had connections and capital from an inheritance. I had experience and the kind of work ethic that makes you useful to everyone and dangerous to yourself. The idea started as a joke, then a fantasy, then a spreadsheet, then a lease. We found a tired little corner space with warped floors, grease in the vents, and windows so filthy the place looked closed even in daylight. I saw possibility. She saw a bargain. For 6 months, we worked almost every day. She handled the legal setup and the money. I did everything else. I helped design the kitchen line. I negotiated with produce vendors. I tested the menu until my apartment smelled like garlic and burnt sugar all winter. I recruited line cooks one by one. I convinced an incredible pastry chef to leave a stable hotel job because I sold her on the vision. I painted walls. I scrubbed floor drains. I carried boxes until both wrists ached at night. Vanessa visited when there were meetings, invoices, or photo opportunities. I lived there. When we finally opened, it was chaos. The POS crashed on opening night. One reservation came in under the wrong date. A server dropped a full tray of glasses in front of table 12. Somebody posted a video of our signature dish. It unexpectedly went viral, and suddenly people were lining up outside by the second weekend. We were full every Friday and Saturday within a month. By month 3, people were calling us one of the best new restaurants in the city. By month 6, we were making real money, not fantasy money, not maybe someday money, real money. And that was exactly when Vanessa changed. At first, it was subtle. She started referring to the restaurant as my investment instead of our place. Then she began scheduling meetings with vendors without telling me, even though I was the one who actually had to work with them. Then she started dropping little comments in front of staff. I think we need a more polished direction. We may have outgrown the original concept. Operations need a more executive structure. It was all framed like growth, like maturity, like I should be proud we were becoming something bigger. But the message underneath was simple. She was becoming the owner, and I was being demoted into the help. I pushed back the first time she tried to force a menu change without consulting me. She wanted to replace 3 of our best-selling dishes with bland, expensive plates that looked good on camera and terrible in real life. She said we needed to attract wealthier clients. I said we already had wealthy clients, and they came because the food actually meant something. We argued in the office for almost an hour. At the end, she smiled in that way that made other people think she was being gracious, but I knew meant she had already decided to do whatever she wanted. The next week, she introduced her boyfriend, Trevor, as our new general manager. Not suggested, not proposed, introduced. Trevor had never successfully run a restaurant in his life. He had experience in hospitality, which turned out to mean he had once been assistant manager at a rooftop bar where bottle service did most of the work for him. He wore expensive watches, called female servers "sweetheart," and acted like walking through the dining room slowly was the same thing as leadership. Vanessa brought him in because she trusted him, and because if he was in the building, she had an extra set of hands controlling everything I couldn't see. I told her this was unacceptable. We were partners. Major hires needed agreement. She said we were adapting. I said she was consolidating power. She laughed and asked if I was really going to be emotional about structure now that the business was finally thriving. That word stuck with me. Emotional. It's a convenient word people use when they want to turn someone else's valid alarm into instability. Trevor started changing things immediately. He rewrote schedules without consulting department heads. He cut labor in the wrong places and left us understaffed on the busiest nights. He switched cleaning suppliers to some company a friend recommended, and within 2 weeks the kitchen floors were slippery and the glassware smelled like chemicals. He started hovering over the hosts, telling them to prioritize influencers and high-value guests. One night he tried to move a long-time regular from her favorite table because some finance guy with a loud voice had walked in wearing a suit. I stepped in, put the regular back where she belonged, and Trevor stared at me like I had embarrassed him in front of his kingdom. He hated that the staff listened to me without hesitation. That was the thing Vanessa never understood. Titles matter, but only up to a point. In restaurants, people know who keeps the ship from sinking. They know who shows up when someone's mother is in the hospital. They know who covers a station instead of lecturing from the doorway. They know who remembers that one prep cook is sending money home, that one server is taking night classes, that the dishwasher likes extra lime in his shift drink because it reminds him of home. Those things sound small to outsiders. They are not small. They are the actual wiring inside a place. And I was wired into every part of that restaurant. Vanessa saw numbers. I saw people. I didn't realize she had already started stealing until Louis, our bookkeeper, made a mistake that saved me. Louis was meticulous but nervous. He'd been with us since the beginning, doing part-time books while finishing his accounting certification. One afternoon, he came into my office pale and sweaty, holding 2 folders. He said he needed to ask whether I had approved the consulting transfers. I had no idea what he was talking about. He showed me a series of payments listed under brand development and strategic advisory services. Large numbers, repeated over months. I asked who the consultant was. He pointed to an LLC I'd never seen before. I asked who owned it. He hesitated. Then he said he looked it up after the second transfer because something felt off. The company belonged to Vanessa. Not directly, of course. The paperwork ran through a corporate shell, but the mailing address traced back to a property she owned. The registered agent was her cousin. The signature authorization matched one on our lease renewal packet. Once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. She had been quietly draining profits from the business we built, disguising her withdrawals as outside consulting expenses, then speaking to me like margins were tighter than expected, and we all needed to be patient. I sat there staring at those printouts for a long time, not because I didn't understand them, because I did. There is a very specific kind of betrayal that happens when the worst suspicion you didn't want to entertain turns out to be smaller than the reality. I thought she was edging me out. I thought she wanted control. I thought she was arrogant, dismissive, and increasingly entitled. I had not fully let myself believe she was stealing from me while smiling to my face. Louis thought I should confront her immediately. I told him not yet. Because in that moment, the story in my head changed. Up until then, I was trying to save a friendship, save a partnership, save a restaurant from conflict. After that afternoon, I stopped trying to save anything that depended on her honesty. I started trying to understand exactly how far she had gone and how stupid she thought I was. The answer was, very far and extremely. Over the next 3 weeks, I quietly gathered information. Louis printed records and took screenshots. Our pastry chef, Nina, told me Trevor had been pressuring managers to sign revised vendor forms without copying me. Our bar lead mentioned that Vanessa had been holding private ownership meetings in the office after hours. One of our servers overheard Trevor bragging that once the restructuring was complete, the restaurant would finally be run by professionals. Another employee told me Vanessa had already met with an attorney about buying out dead weight. Dead weight, apparently, was me. I should tell you that I wasn't passive through any of this. I confronted smaller lies. I challenged stupid decisions. I documented everything. But I did not show my full hand, not because I was afraid. Because once I understood the scale of what Vanessa was doing, I knew one emotional confrontation would only help her. She wanted me angry. She wanted me reactive. She wanted me to sound unstable and possessive, so she could tell the board, the lawyers, the bank, and eventually the staff that I was no longer capable of leadership. So I became patient, in a way she mistook for weakness. Then came the meeting. She asked me to come in early on a Monday, before lunch prep. Trevor was already in the office, leaning back in the chair like he paid for the building himself. Vanessa had documents laid out neatly on the desk. She was wearing cream-colored silk, and that expression rich people use when they want cruelty to look administrative. She said she wanted to discuss the future of the restaurant. I said I was listening. She started with praise. My contribution had been invaluable. My dedication had helped establish the brand. My culinary instincts had been essential in the early phase. Every sentence sounded like the introduction to an award I was not going to receive. Then she shifted. The restaurant had entered a new stage. Investors looked for centralized leadership. The operational model needed refinement. Roles had to evolve. There was concern, she said gently, that I was too embedded in day-to-day execution to think strategically. Trevor would be taking on broader authority. I would remain involved in a reduced creative capacity during a transition period. Then she slid the documents toward me. She wanted me to sign a revised agreement stripping my decision-making authority, reducing my profit participation, and effectively turning me into a salaried employee inside the business I had built. When I looked up, Trevor actually smiled. I asked Vanessa if she was out of her mind. She didn't flinch. She said this was the cleanest option. If I cooperated, there would be a respectable announcement about stepping back to focus on menu development. If I refused, they were prepared to pursue removal based on operational volatility, insubordination, and failure to adapt to governance. She said the words slowly, like they would scare me. She said attorneys were already reviewing everything. She said she had the votes aligned to protect the company. She said she was trying to do this privately because of our history. That was the moment I knew she had spent too long around people who confuse paperwork with power. I asked her one question. Did you really think nobody would notice the consulting payments? For the first time in the entire conversation, her face changed. Trevor straightened up. Vanessa went still. She asked what I meant. I said exactly what I meant. Brand development, strategic advisory, repeated transfers to a shell company tied to her, silent extraction of profits while telling me the business needed tighter controls. Her mouth tightened, but she recovered quickly. She said all reimbursements were legitimate and documented. She said I was in dangerous territory making accusations I couldn't prove. I almost laughed. Instead, I stood up, pushed the unsigned papers back across the desk, and told her she had two choices. She could unwind Trevor's authority, stop every unauthorized transfer, open the books completely, and sit down with independent counsel by the end of the week. Or she could continue down this path and learn in public who actually kept that restaurant running. She said that sounded like a threat. I said no. A threat would involve uncertainty. Then I walked out. That afternoon, Vanessa did exactly what people like her always do when they realize someone has seen the mask slip. She escalated. At 4:30, right before service, Trevor gathered the managers and announced a restructuring effective immediately. All reporting lines now went through him. Inventory approvals required management clearance. Staff concerns were to be routed through formal channels rather than informal personal relationships. That phrase was aimed at me. Vanessa followed by sending an email saying I would be taking a short leave while ownership aligned on operational efficiency. A short leave. That was how she tried to disappear me, not with a dramatic firing, not with a fight in front of witnesses, with language, soft words, corporate bleach. The kind that removes blood from the floor and history from the story. A few years earlier, that probably would have broken me. But Vanessa had one fatal blind spot. She thought loyalty could be purchased the same way she bought design fixtures and PR coverage. She thought the staff would adapt to whatever chart she handed them because people need jobs and fear uncertainty. She forgot that jobs are one thing, dignity is another. By 6 o'clock, my phone started exploding. One line cook asked if the email was a joke. A server sent me a screenshot and wrote, "Tell me what's happening and I'm with you." Nina called and said the pastry team was furious. Our sous chef, Marcus, who almost never raised his voice, said Trevor had tried to explain my absence as leadership evolution, and half the kitchen walked away from him mid-sentence. Even our bartender, who generally avoided management drama like it was contagious, said people were asking whether I was coming back or whether they should start looking elsewhere. I told everyone the same thing. Do your jobs tonight, do not make a scene, and do not quit yet. That last part was important. Rage can be useful, but timing is everything. For the next 2 days, Trevor and Vanessa tried to assert control. It was ugly. Prep lists were delayed because nobody trusted the revised purchasing system. The floor managers stopped going to Trevor with problems because his answers usually made things worse. He overbooked a Friday private table and nearly seated 2 parties on top of each other. Vanessa came in wearing expensive confidence and spent most of her time pretending not to notice how cold the room felt when she passed. Then came Thursday, the night they planned to make their new structure official. They hosted what Vanessa called a leadership reception after service. She invited local investors, a few industry people, her lawyer, Trevor's friends, and some carefully selected regulars who liked being near money. It was supposed to be a show of stability, a message. The restaurant was entering a sophisticated new chapter, and the woman who had sweated in the kitchen since day one was already being edited out. What Vanessa did not know was that almost every employee had already made a decision. Not impulsively, not emotionally, deliberately. Marcus came to see me that afternoon with Nina and Louis. They met me in a coffee shop 2 blocks away. Marcus spoke first. He said nobody wanted to work for Trevor. Nina said the pastry team would leave the same day if I told them to. Louis said he had copied every relevant financial record and stored them in 3 separate places. Then he put a folder on the table and said the labor attorney he'd shown them to called the pattern aggressively indefensible. I remember staring at that folder while the espresso machine hissed in the background and thinking, she really did all of this because she believed the people doing the work were interchangeable. I asked them what they wanted. Marcus answered immediately, "We want our restaurant back." That sentence hit me harder than any insult Vanessa had ever thrown. Because that was the truth of it. The place no longer belonged to the person holding the money. It belonged to the people who built its heartbeat every single day. So we made a plan. At 9:30 that night, after the last full dinner turn but before the reception ended, the senior staff would gather in the dining room. Not as a mob, as witnesses. Louis would provide copies of the financials. Marcus and Nina would state, clearly and calmly, that the team no longer had confidence in Trevor's management or Vanessa's integrity. I would walk in only after they had already spoken because this could not look like manipulation. It had to be what it was, collective refusal. Vanessa loved optics. Fine, she was about to get optics. I arrived at the restaurant just before 10 and waited outside in my car. Through the windows, I could see the reception in full swing. Wine glasses, expensive laughter, Trevor doing that chest-forward posture men use when they are borrowing authority from the room. Vanessa was standing near the bar speaking to 2 investors and gesturing toward the open kitchen like she had personally taught fire how to cook. Then I saw Marcus move. He walked from the kitchen into the center of the dining room still wearing his apron. Nina stepped beside him. Then the floor manager joined them. Then 2 servers. Then 3 more. Then the bar lead. Then Louis holding the folder. One by one, almost every employee not actively finishing a closing task stepped into view. Not shouting, not chaotic, just present. You could feel the room change, even from outside. Trevor noticed first and said something sharply. Marcus ignored him. Vanessa turned, saw the staff assembled, and smiled the tight smile of someone who thinks she can control whatever this is. She started walking toward them. That was when I got out of the car and headed inside. By the time I entered, the room had gone almost silent. Marcus was speaking. He said in a steady voice that the staff had serious concerns about the current management direction. Nina followed and said the restaurant's success had come from a culture of trust, and that trust had been damaged beyond repair. The floor manager said team members had been excluded, dismissed, and misled. Then Lewis opened the folder and began handing copies to Vanessa, her lawyer, and the investors closest to them. Vanessa's face changed as soon as she saw the first page. She tried to stop him, asked what he thought he was doing. Lewis, who had spent most of his life apologizing for taking up space, looked directly at her and said, "Documenting the truth." Trevor stepped forward like he wanted to seize the papers out of people's hands, but Marcus moved half an inch and Trevor froze. That's the thing about men like Trevor. They love power until it stands still in front of them without fear. Then Vanessa saw me. I will never forget that look. Not anger first, not embarrassment, calculation collapsing into panic, because she understood immediately that this was no longer a private negotiation she could frame, spin, or suffocate. The people in that room were reading numbers. Investors were whispering. Her lawyer was flipping pages faster with every sheet. Staff members who had never once made a scene were standing openly aligned against her. And the woman she had tried to place on leave was now standing in the center of the restaurant, invited there by the only people who mattered that night. She demanded to know why I was there. I told her the staff asked me to come. Those 8 words did more damage than any speech could have. She tried to pivot, said these records were being misinterpreted, said certain compensation structures were above the staff's understanding, said this kind of public disruption was inappropriate and deeply unprofessional. It almost worked on a couple of her guests, until Nina spoke again and asked, loud enough for everyone to hear, whether it was also professional to siphon profit while telling the team there wasn't room for raises. That landed. Then one of the servers, quiet little Emma who had cried in the wine closet during her first month because she was scared of dropping plates, stepped forward and said she had been told I was on leave for the good of the company. She asked Vanessa whether the good of the company meant replacing the woman who trained every person in that building, while secretly paying herself through a fake consulting firm. Now it was over. Because once the youngest, least political person in the room says the thing everyone is thinking, the performance dies. Vanessa turned to her lawyer, who no longer looked like he wanted to be standing anywhere near her. Trevor muttered something about insubordination and threatened termination. Marcus actually laughed, not loudly, just once. Then he said, "You can't terminate a restaurant that won't run for you." He was right. In that moment, Vanessa finally confronted the part of business she had ignored from the beginning. Ownership on paper is not the same as functional control. A restaurant is not a stock portfolio. It cannot be squeezed into obedience if the chef, the sous chef, the pastry team, the floor leads, the bar, the prep crew, and the people who hold the whole machine together decide they no longer believe in the people at the top. She looked around the room for someone to salvage her, someone with authority, someone she could still impress. But the investors were pulling back. The lawyer was whispering to her with the clipped urgency of a man billing by the hour and regretting every minute. Trevor looked ready to explode, but he had no audience left. Even the guests understood they were watching a collapse, not a conflict. So I spoke. I kept it simple. I said the restaurant had been built through shared labor, trust, and sacrifice. I said financial misconduct had been discovered and documented. I said I would be filing formal claims in the morning and seeking emergency protection for the business against further unauthorized transfers. I said any employee who wished to remain and help stabilize operations would be protected to the fullest extent possible. Then I looked at Vanessa and told her she should have remembered one basic fact before trying to bury me. Money may open a restaurant, but people keep it alive. No one clapped. This wasn't a movie. It was better than that. People just stood there, and Vanessa had to feel, with nothing to hide behind, that the room had left her. The next few weeks were brutal in the way real victories usually are. There were lawyers, injunctions, emergency filings, ugly emails, frozen accounts, and endless meetings. Vanessa tried to argue the payments were contractually defensible. That didn't last. The deeper the records were examined, the worse it looked. Trevor resigned before he could be formally removed, though not before sending me a long, self-righteous message claiming I had orchestrated a hostile workplace. I saved it, smiled, and forwarded it to counsel. The investors she thought would back her did what investors often do when scandal threatens return. They disappeared. Quietly. Efficiently. The same people who loved her certainty suddenly had no time for lunch. Her lawyer negotiated instead of posturing. A settlement process began. It took months, but in the end, Vanessa gave up her controlling position, repaid a substantial portion of the extracted funds, and signed a separation agreement that kept her far away from the business she had nearly gutted. And the restaurant. The restaurant survived. More than that, it became better. The first service after everything settled felt different. Not triumphant exactly. Cleaner. The kind of clean that comes after a storm breaks the wrong things and leaves the structure that matters standing. Marcus ran the line like he'd been waiting his whole life for a kitchen without nonsense. Nina introduced a new dessert called the Silent Partner, which made everyone laugh so hard we almost kept the name. Emma became one of our strongest captains. Louis moved into a full financial controller role and, for obvious reasons, became the most trusted man in the building. We gave raises where we could. We rebuilt slowly and honestly. Not glamorous, not flashy, just right. A year later, a magazine did a feature on resilient businesses and asked me what the turning point had been. They expected me to talk about legal strategy or crisis management. Instead, I told them the truth. The turning point was the moment the staff stood together in the dining room and refused to pretend not to see what was happening. People love stories about revenge because they think revenge is a dramatic final blow, a reveal, a takedown, a humiliating last line, and sometimes it is. But the most powerful revenge I have ever seen is much quieter than that. It is when someone tries to make you small, temporary, replaceable, and the truth rises in the form of people whose lives you actually touched. It is when all the invisible things you did with no guarantee of reward come back and stand beside you. It is when someone who worshipped leverage discovers she never understood loyalty. Vanessa thought I was the expendable one because I didn't bring the initial capital. She thought labor could be substituted, culture could be managed from above, and trust could be imitated with branding. She never understood that every late night I spent helping prep, every conversation in the alley behind the restaurant, every time I stayed after close to help someone through a bad shift, every time I defended the team against stupidity from above, I was building equity she couldn't see on a balance sheet. That was my weapon. Not blackmail, not sabotage, not some secret legal loophole. People. Real people who knew exactly who had built that place with them. So if you ever find yourself being pushed aside by someone who mistakes your hard work for dependency, remember this. Not all power announces itself. Some power lives quietly in reputation, consistency, and the loyalty you earn when nobody is watching. And when the moment comes, that kind of power is the one that remains standing. If you made it this far, comment, "The staff chose," so I know you stayed until the end. Subscribe for more revenge stories where the wrong person gets just confident enough to destroy themselves, and share this with someone who knows that being underestimated can be the biggest advantage of all.